Are you moving to New York or just imagining what it would be like? Today, I'll answer your questions about life in America's largest city and tell you the truth about living in New York in 2024. Anything goes. Let's jump right to the first question. This one was asked a few different ways. A lot of videos saying rent is crazy expensive in NYC, so where are the majority of workers residing? Is rent really unaffordable everywhere in NYC, or is it just the more popular places? Of all the regular jobs in NYC, retail, restaurants, service workers, where do they live? And what they're all asking is, with rent sky high, how does the average person afford to live in this city? And that is the biggest issue that everyone's facing right now. It's cost of living. There's a few ways around this, and the easiest is not to live in any of the trendy parts of New York. I'm talking about a lot of Manhattan, Williamsburg, Brooklyn, Long Island City, Queens. Look, New York has a total area of 468 square miles. From my experience, if you live in South Brooklyn or the Bronx or eastern parts of Queens, you will save money and you'll have more space. You'll still have the New York experience, but it won't be the touristy one. You'll probably have a bodega nearby, and you can still DoorDash from 1,000 places, but you will need 40 minutes to get to Midtown. There's always a trade-off. Now, the alternate option, if you must live in a trendy neighborhood, is to have a roommate or multiple roommates. I even knew a guy in his 50s who lived in Harlem with 2 separate roommates. And there's no shame in having a roommate in your 50s if that's your dream to live in New York. When I first moved to New York, I split a $2,000 a month 2-bedroom apartment in Greenwich Village with my twin brother. The place was an absolute shoebox. I even have old footage from before I moved in back in 2011. I've never shown this on the channel before. Tiny apartment, but some of the best memories of my life. Also a sacrifice having a roommate, living in a smaller place if you must live in a popular area. How many days does it take for a person to be considered a New Yorker? That's a loaded question, because I have news for you. There's people born and raised here who will never consider you a real New Yorker unless you're born and raised here as well. I don't agree with that. I asked a friend of mine who's a native New Yorker his definition of this. Being a New Yorker isn't about a set amount of time here. It's about a mindset. Are you open to all the cultures, or are you just following what Instagram tells you is cool to make your plans? Are you embracing everything the city has to offer, or just staying in your bubble? That was what he told me makes a New Yorker. I have another definition. I was once taking the subway and I saw a guy board my car, stood there, not holding on to any railing, put his coffee down on the floor of the subway, and the coffee didn't even spill as the train pulled away through multiple stops. When you could do that, you're a New Yorker. Is New York safe to move to? I'm concerned about all of the crime. I mean, I don't blame you for being concerned about all the crime. I think the media a lot of times gives a false impression of New York as some urban hellhole, when the truth is crime happens here, but statistically speaking, it won't likely affect you, assuming you're not walking through the worst areas late at night or not paying attention to your surroundings. Now, according to the NYPD, crime is down this year in many categories, but not all crimes are reported, so take that with a grain of salt. Paying attention to your surroundings is gonna help you avoid most bad situations. How expensive is it really? With 180 square foot studio apartments being $3,000 in San Diego, we're on track to outprice LA and San Francisco. How does NY rent stack up in comparison to other major cities now? It's very expensive. The only good news I have for you is that the New York metro area actually ranks 7th in the US. Number 1 is San Jose, Sunnyvale, Santa Clara at $3.4 thousand a month. The New York metro area 7th at $2,589. But those numbers quickly shoot up if we consider just Manhattan. So it depends where you look in the city, but it's still very pricey. What's it like raising a family in NYC with a hustle and bustle? My wife believes it's very difficult since we have a 9-month-old, and it can be very scary for him out there. Any advice? If you were moving out there, would you recommend Brooklyn or Manhattan to begin with? I'm going through this myself right now. We have a son who's almost 2 years old, and you really do feel a lack of space in the city. We live in Brooklyn, and that's a trope in New York circles. Start in Manhattan, then move to Brooklyn, and maybe the suburbs after that. But there's actually neighborhoods in Manhattan popular with families like Battery Park or the Upper West Side. Queens has tons too. I think the biggest factors here are public versus private space. In the city, you're gonna spend more time at playgrounds, museums, play gyms. In the suburbs, you'll have a backyard or a front yard. So it's one less thing to worry about, but it's also more isolating. The other factor to keep in mind is we walk almost everywhere with our son. When you live in the suburbs, outside of the city, generally speaking, you're gonna be driving everywhere, and I prefer to walk for sure. I think it's totally doable, at least with a toddler. I have not had a child in the public schools yet, so I'm not really qualified to answer that, but that is a big source of contention here in that you're not guaranteed your top choice of middle school or high school. For high schools, you even have to take a test. The short answer is there are many people raising families in New York. 20% of the city is under 18. Why are you influencers, media exaggerating that much about pretty much anything in NYC? That's a good question. The short answer is we're all living in the attention economy. So when you exaggerate points about city life, it's gonna get more attention, more clicks, more views, and ultimately more money. Now, when I started on social media, what I generally saw was all positive content about New York, playing it up to be this fantasy world. And you still see a lot of that, but what's changed in recent years is I'm also seeing a lot of negative commentary about New York on social media, talking about the crime increases, migrant stuff, you name it. And guess what? That gets just as much attention, if not more attention and more money than the positive stuff. How much money would I need to live like Carrie Bradshaw from Sex and the City, LOL? Carrie's a fictional character because I don't know how a newspaper writer is affording to live in an apartment in the West Village, which is one of the most expensive neighborhoods in the entire city. The average rent in the West Village is $5,291 a month. That's $63,000 a year just to rent. And those Cosmo she's drinking at $18 to $20 a pop, pre-tip, that's gonna add up. I think she better be making at least $200,000 a year to really enjoy that lifestyle if she wants to save anything at the end. What is your take on the current pros and cons of living in places like Jersey City, Hoboken, or Union City, New Jersey, as opposed to the outer boroughs? I feel quite qualified to answer this question, as I grew up in Jersey myself. The biggest pro is the money you're gonna save on taxes versus living in Queens or Brooklyn or Staten Island or the Bronx. You're not gonna pay the New York City tax, which at the end of the year on your income, for most people is an extra 4 to 7%. And the spots that you mentioned, particularly Jersey City and Hoboken, have more of an urban vibe than many of the quieter parts of the outer boroughs. Hoboken's absolutely beautiful. One thing to keep in mind with those areas is that many people with Jersey ties like to live there to keep one foot in the city life and one foot in Jersey to be closer to friends and family. Another is you're not connected to the subway system. The PATH train is great, but where I live in Brooklyn, I can get to other parts of the city much quicker than only having access to one line. Or you'd be relying on a bus in a place like Union City. Overall, they may be a little bit cheaper than some of the trendier areas of the outer boroughs, but they're more isolated in my opinion, and the surrounding areas, it gets suburban really quick. Is Manhattan a good place to move to as an artist? I'm also a former New Yorker, but I've been out of state for a few years. Manhattan's huge. If you want to live the stereotypical artist life in a tiny apartment in the East Village, like, yeah, you could get that. But if you want a lot of space, unless you're going uptown, you are not going to find it in Manhattan, at least not cheap. How easy or hard is it to find an apartment? It can be very easy or very hard depending on your price range. If you're looking for a $6,000 a month 2-bedroom in a luxury building in Williamsburg, you're probably not gonna have a lot of competition for it. But if you want a $2,500 a month studio in the Village, you can bet there's gonna be a lot of people applying, and they might even bid on it and bring up the price. At the entry level, for an apartment in a popular neighborhood, competition is fierce. These apartments go quick. So if you see something you like, you better apply that day, apply that hour as soon as you get home. If you don't have furniture to bring with you, where is a good reasonable place to buy furniture like a sofa and bed? Well, I used Wayfair when I moved to my apartment in Brooklyn back in 2020, but here's a little hack I learned though. Facebook Marketplace. People are leaving New York every single day, and they will sell items on Facebook Marketplace well below market value. In some instances, they will just give it away for free. So if you are on a budget, check out Facebook. I saw a few questions all the same. Something I've wondered is how and where most New Yorkers make their first group of friends, how to meet people in different neighborhoods. Oh, my friend Norma, what would be the best way to make new friends when moving to NYC? I understand this concern because on the surface, New York looks like this big, scary, anonymous place. But I'll tell you, making friends in New York is easier than making friends in any other city in the US. If you move to some small town somewhere, even a suburb, a lot of people's friends are those that they grew up with. They're not looking to meet new people. In New York, there's so many newcomers that all you need to do to make friends is find groups that share your common interests, whatever that may be, social media, photography, Italo disco. There are so many people looking to make friends in New York. You just have to put the effort in. Keeping those friends over a long period of time, that's a different story, as well as dating. But just making friends, I don't think it's as hard as people think. What is the most common mistake people make when moving to New York? Now, you may expect me to say picking the wrong apartment, but I'm gonna say picking the wrong neighborhood. I would tell any newcomer to the city to value their neighborhood choice over anything. You know, is it too noisy? Is it near subways? Most important, what's within a 15-minute walk of where you are? Unless you're absolutely on a shoestring budget, you've got to explore the area. And I actually shot an entire video dedicated to picking the right neighborhood in New York, so check that out if you've got some questions. This is a great question. How do you get big purchases to an apartment without a car? I was really concerned about this when I first moved to New York 13 years ago. The truth is, almost any place you go to has a delivery option. Every supermarket has delivery. For years, I had a little cart that I would take to the supermarket till I realized it was $5 or $10 extra to get delivery, and that was a complete game changer. Nowadays, we order everything off of Amazon, which goes directly to Whole Foods. But if you can think of it, they'll deliver it within New York City, probably same day or next day. We just had a mattress delivered, for example. Worst case, you can always get a zip car if you want to go to IKEA. I don't know. But delivery is the answer to this question, including laundry. Do rent-stabilized apartments exist? If so, what neighborhoods have them? Now, for those who don't know what that means, rent-stabilized apartments are protected from sharp increases in rent, and tenants have the right to renew their leases under almost any circumstance. As of 2023, about 44% of rental units in New York City are rent stabilized, which is almost 1 million. Now, the percentage that you have to pay yearly just got hiked. It's gonna be 2 to 4.5% rent increase for a 1-year lease, 4 to 6.5% increase for a 2-year lease. And one of the benefits of rent-stabilized apartments is that your landlord is not going to increase the rent by $500 or $600 every year. So they are extremely competitive to get, but they do exist. And if you want to find out if a building is rent-stabilized, typically they contain 6 or more units, were built before 1974, and are not co-ops or condos. What's the biggest difference between locals and transplants? It's your boy Mike with a tough but fair question. He's been on the channel before. In this case, by transplant, he means someone like me who moved to New York from a different location. In my case, it was North Jersey, but it's all over the country and the world, really. I think the biggest difference is that transplants don't take the city for granted as much. I think we appreciate it a lot because of where we came from. If we chose to come here because we were tired of where we lived before, we saw other opportunities here, where the native New Yorkers, I think they earn the right to complain about New York, and I think they do complain about it a bit more than the transplants do. Maybe they take it for granted sometimes, but deep down, I think they like it just as much as we do. Is New York getting worse or better in your opinion? That depends who you are. If you're rich, it's definitely getting better. There's always new luxury buildings, new restaurants, new experiences to spend your money on. So if you're rich, getting better. If you're poor, things are getting more expensive, and I could definitely see how the cost of living is affecting many people who can barely afford to live here. And also, if you can't afford to take Ubers everywhere, you have to take the subway. And then you are going to run into more unsavory things on a daily or weekly basis that the rich people probably won't see so much. Overall, I think the city runs in cycles. I'd like to say that we're improving post-COVID, at least on the crime front, but there's many that say that New York is going down right now. it just depends on your perspective. How to take that big step in spite of family, friends, residents, etc. People may think you're crazy for moving to New York, and the easiest way to move here would be if you had a significant other, family member, or a job that brought you here. But I say go for it if you really want to live here, because you can be miserable living in a spot that you don't enjoy, or you can be happy living somewhere that you actually want to be. Is it realistic to live in Manhattan with a family of 5? That depends on your financial situation first, because if you're well off, you can easily afford a 3, 4-bedroom apartment, maybe even a townhouse, I don't know, in the Upper West Side, Upper East Side. But if you're coming from the median income of the United States to Manhattan, you're probably going to be living in a 2-bedroom, 3-bedroom apartment, and you're gonna be on top of each other. So if you're willing to sacrifice space for location, if you're a tight-knit family that can pull that off, and I have met many that can, go for it. Me personally, if I had a family of 5, I don't think I'd live in Manhattan. Does moving to New York get harder the older you are? Yes and no. Assuming you've saved up a lot of money because of your advanced age, then you will have advantages moving to New York. You'll have more options of places to live. As far as the social scene, if you're older, the majority of people that move to New York, truthfully, are in their 20s and 30s. You know, they're moving here for career opportunities or just because they want to change. Yeah, people do move here when they're older, but I just don't think it's as common. So it might be more difficult to find friends if you're, I don't know, 50s or 60s, but definitely not impossible. Do you got any tips for people moving from Latin America? I love your videos. Thank you very much. My wife is from Mexico. There is a huge Latino population in New York. I think assimilating here will not be that difficult. The one difference that my wife and I always joke about when I visit Mexico is that over there, having a loud party till 2, 3, 4 in the morning is just part of the culture, where in New York, yeah, it can get loud, but having loud get-togethers is not part of the culture, generally speaking, here, and people will complain about that, so that's probably the main difference, I would say. Owning a car versus using public transit. When I lived in Manhattan, I knew a guy who had a car, and he would have to sit in it twice a week for an hour or 2 at a time due to street sweeping. So unless you want to deal with those kinds of things or pay somebody to move your car or park it in an expensive lot, I don't think having a car in many situations is worth it. The only people I know who have cars live far off from Manhattan. A lot of them I know actually live in Queens who have cars, and they almost never will drive to Midtown. The public transportation in New York is amazing, connectivity is great, and worst case, you can always take an Uber, Revel, or Lyft. Having visited last year from the UK, I realized you are never far from food in New York. Do New Yorkers have kitchens? If so, how often do they use them? New Yorkers do have kitchens. Even the tiniest apartments I've ever shown on the channel have little kitchenettes. Do New Yorkers use them? That depends if they want to save money and if they like to cook. I have friends who almost never will use their kitchen. In our case, Adriana, my wife, likes to cook, so we do eat a lot of meals at home, so it just depends on who you are. But if you want to spend a lot of your money on ordering DoorDash, very easy to do. What does New York uniquely offer in one's life that no other city offers? This question actually took me a little bit to think about, but I would say diversity on a whole different scale than you're used to, because not only is this city the world's largest melting pot, but for whatever reason, and for good reasons, this city works together so well. People from different cultures intermingle, they marry, their kids go to school together. Many of your friends, most of your friends, I will say, will probably be from different backgrounds here. It just works. With all the differences people have in New York, somehow we all come together as one. And that is what I think truly makes New York a unique and special place and my favorite city on earth. Now that you know about moving to New York, the last thing you want when you get here is to get scammed. And in this video, I share New York's most common scams you definitely want to avoid. Watch this next.